Hi, I'm Carlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Carolyn Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well, hey, everyone. We're live a little bit early today because we have 2 spy streams in a row. I gotta tell you, I'm pretty excited about what we're gonna watch today. So for those of you who were here yesterday, we watched, hang on, there it is. We watched a webinar from the New York Library Association that was essentially complaining about all these evil right-wingers that have come out of the woodworks. For those of you who haven't been keeping up, essentially what happened is this. The American Library Association elected a self-professed Marxist named Emily to be their president. This is not us saying that, like, she's a Marxist and it's like all this conjecture and it's just a slur. Emily will flat out tell you that she is a Marxist. It's not like an undercover thing. Emily is a critical pedagogy librarian, which critical pedagogy, critical theory is code for Marxism. It comes from the Frankfurt School. We all know that. And she'll flat out tell you what she believes. And she got herself elected president of the American Library Association. And there was a backlash to that, led by our friend Dan Kleinman, who goes under Safe Libraries. Everyone welcome Dan to the chat. And you guys may have heard a thing or two about it, where the Montana State Library Association, because they were pissed off at the Marxist president of the American Library Association, they chose to cut ties with them entirely and just say, we're not going to be a part of an association that's led by a Marxist. Sorry, that's not going to work here. Then the Texas State Library Association just cut ties with the American Library Association as well. And so now all of the other woke library associations are like scrambling and they're going out of their way to support Emily in the conservative lynching attacks that she has undergone because she is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Of course, it has nothing to do with the fact that Emily is a lesbian. We don't care that Emily is a lesbian. What we care about is that Emily is a Marxist. And so all these library associations have been coming out of the woodworks and doing all these presentations. Yesterday, we did a spy stream from the New York Library Association, and thank God we did, because the New York Library Association on yesterday's stream flat out said they weren't recording the stream because they wanted, and this was a Zoom meeting, they wanted to have a private meeting among librarians where they could talk about the most pressing issues facing librarians today with the evil right-wing pushback and censorship. So we did the New York Library Association a favor and we streamed it for them. And so that is available on the channel right now. You can go back and watch that. But I was taking a look at Emily's Twitter. Now, Emily has blocked me on my main Twitter. I don't know why. I never interacted with Emily, so I don't know why she wouldn't want me to see her Twitter account. But she did block me on my main Twitter account. So, but fortunately for Wendy, I have like 8,000 burner accounts, and so I logged in onto one of my burner accounts. Yes, exactly. We always have a backup, Yasmin. We've learned our lesson. And I was just like, scrolling through Emily's Twitter today just to see what's what, see what's going on. And I came across this post. Join me and leaders across the library information sciences field for a conversation about the crucial issues facing libraries and librarians in the current political and cultural climate at 3 p.m. Eastern time today. And they're doing us a big favor and they're zooming it onto the internet, which means, and registration was even free. I didn't have to pay for it. Thank you, University of Maryland College of Information. Oh, sorry, not Library of Studies, College of Information Studies. American librarians are on the front lines of political and cultural battles facing book bans and censorship. Join the University American Libraries today for a vital discussion with Paul T. Yeager. And so, I went ahead and signed up for that. And here is the description of what we're going to be listening into starting at 3 p.m. It is called Safeguarding Intellectual Freedom: How to Counter Censorship and the Criminalization of Librarianship in America. American libraries are increasingly becoming the targets in the political and cultural wars spreading across the country, part of the growing movement to ban books, censor ideas, and restrict educators' ability to discuss race, gender, identity, and LGBTQ plus issues in the classroom. How can freedom to read advocates and community members counter the divisive tactics and rhetoric which portray libraries as a space of indoctrination and librarians as villains peddling harmful literature? The University of Maryland Libraries, taxpayer-funded institution, presents a virtual dialogue to examine the challenges facing academic and public libraries and explore the actions that can be taken to ensure libraries remain bastions of intellectual freedom for all. This free webinar is part of the University of Maryland Libraries Living Democracy Initiative. And you'll see we've got some panelists, and right at the top is Emily Drabinski, Associate Professor at the Queens College School of Library and Information Studies and President of the American Library Association. Paul Yeager, Professor and Distinguished Scholar Teacher in the University of Maryland College of Information Studies. Emily Knox, Associate Professor, iSchool, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign is also uber woke, by the way, so let's just keep that in mind. Felton Thomas Jr., Executive Director of the Cleveland Public Library, and moderated by someone who, I apologize, I'm sure it's very racist, I ain't pronouncing that name, Associate Director of something that I don't understand what it is, and the host is the Dean of the University of Maryland Libraries. You're welcome. We will be spy streaming in about 15 minutes when this meeting gets started, and I will take you inside the meeting itself. And I just want to make sure I actually have my thing set up correctly. Hang on. Yes, I do. Okay, never mind. I thought I for a second I was like, oh no, I had a technical difficulty, but no, I didn't. I did set it up correctly. So we will be going inside this meeting, guys, and we're gonna see what they have to say. Now, if you've never been to a spy stream before, there's a couple things to keep in mind. I'm going to tell you about that in a second. Going to take this super chat from Naruto. Shout out to Jaden. That kid is going places. Yes, Jaden is a 12-year-old in Colorado who got told he can't wear the Gadsden flag on his backpack. I'm going to be doing a story about that later today on my Substack. Speaking of my Substack, if you want to support the work I'm doing, you can head over to Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com and sign up there. You can always subscribe to my Substack for free, which will give you access to a bunch of free stories, including the one I posted just last night. Did you guys know that a Marxist teacher in the Aurora Public Schools in Colorado, if Aurora Public Schools sounds familiar, it's because we visited them before, a Marxist, self-professed Marxist teacher in the Aurora Public Schools in Colorado just got himself elected to an open seat in the Colorado House of Representatives. And I have to thank Tim for this because Tim said the quiet part out loud about public schools being socialism. And I also wrote this story last night for the Substack, all about the things that Tim, the new Colorado state rep, has been posting on Twitter. And wouldn't you know it, he is friends with Brian. And Brian is another Marxist teacher in the Aurora Public Schools in Colorado who is also running for public office. And I made Brian go viral 2 years ago when Brian was tweeting about the fact that he was going to teach critical race theory regardless of what the law was. Brian is actually in my book, Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. You can get your copy at activelyunwoke.com or on Amazon, wherever. And so I've actually written about Brian before. Brian was also the teacher that got the Colorado Teachers Union to denounce capitalism. And he's friends with our boy Tim, who has been posting some very interesting things on Twitter about what he believes. And, I used it as an opportunity to teach people how to speak socialist. You can find that over on my Substack right now. You can also find, of course, the story about how James O'Keefe burned down Project Veritas. This is the only real reporting into what's going on at Project Veritas that you're going to see anywhere. And I've got part 2 of this coming up in the next day or so. I just finished my interviews, almost finished my interviews with folks from Project Veritas today. And so I'm going to be writing part 2 of this story, which is what happened after James left and Hannah Giles took over, because that's a whole other show that we're not going to get into today. But if you want to find that, you can head over to my Substack, which is, again, carlin.substack.com. And if you want to support the work I'm doing, I am completely 100% funded by you. So if you want to sign up for a subscription of $8 a month or $80 a year, that would really help me out. It will get you access to my private premium archive. It will get you access to 2 Zoom calls every single week with me and my community. It will get you access to our private supporter Discord, where we have writers group on Thursday nights, movie night on Sunday nights. We do a lot of stuff in the community. And guys, I've got some stuff coming out in the next week or so that's going to be members only, premium content only, and I promise you that you're going to want to see it. I can't tell you what it is, but I promise you that you're going to want to see it. So you can help me out by heading over to the Substack and signing up there. Another thing you can do is head over to the Unwoke Art store, which is unwokeart.com, and check out some merch I have on the site, to include the Trump Indictment Victory Tour shirt, to include, of course, the Trump mugshot merchandise, but also to include some other stuff too, like the amazing All Tears Are Tasty tumbler. We don't just drink liberal tears on this channel. We drink conservative tears too on occasion. I have all sorts of other stuff going on at the Unwoke Art store, and I do appreciate it. And Dan, yes, I did see that you did subscribe to me on Twitter. Subscribing to me on Twitter at Dr. Carlin B is another way you can support the work I'm doing, and I really do appreciate it. Twitter's starting to become fun again, so that's really great. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, what else was it? The guide for Spy Stream. Okay. If you have never been to a spy stream before, let me tell you how this is going to work. This is a little bit different than other types of streams that you may have seen before, because this is a live presentation, okay? I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to do. There have been instances in spy stream history before where they have discovered that I was streaming their private meeting and they just decided to cancel the entire meeting. There have been instances in spy stream history before where in the middle of the presentation they found out I was streaming and they stopped the presentation and they canceled it. There have been meetings where nothing really much eventful has happened when we spy stream because we don't know exactly what they're going to say. Maybe they're going to be normal human beings. We don't know. There have been instances when we spy stream before where we see some of the most crazy things you've ever seen in your life because this is behind closed doors. They think they're only talking to their friends. And so, suffice to say, guys, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to do. We have to go with the punches. We have to keep things flexible, and that's just the way it goes. I will not be doing commentary over the training. What I will do, however, is type my thoughts in the chat, and maybe I'll have a typo, maybe I won't, and then I will display them on the screen so you know what I'm thinking, or you'll at least be able to see them in the chat. But the reason I don't do commentary over the training is because this video might conceivably be the only archive that we have of this training if they're not recording it. And so I don't want to talk over it just in case we miss something. I also want to make sure that that we can actually hear what they're saying. So I do not do commentary over the training. All super chats will be displayed on the screen because, of course, I do appreciate them, but they will not be read out loud because, again, we're not doing commentary over the training. That's just the way it goes. And guys, the biggest rule of Spy Stream is that, try to have fun with it because you guys are getting a peek behind the curtain. You guys are seeing things that other people aren't seeing. And this is an important one just because of how prominent Emily and the American Library Association is in the news today. And so we're going to do our best to do her justice. All right, guys, we should be getting started in about 10 minutes or so. And so I'm just waiting for them to start the call. So once they started, I will be streaming that on the stream. But yeah, I hope you guys are all having a good day. Just a quick programming note, actually, since we've got a couple extra minutes. Just a reminder. So because we're doing Spy Stream today, I'm not going to do my regular 5 p.m. stream because Thursday or Tuesdays, it's only Tuesday. Tuesdays are a busy day. Tuesdays, this is not my last stream of the day, but my first stream of the day, and I will be back later tonight with Nothing Remotely Controversial with Joshua the Psychic. Nothing Remotely Controversial is a lighthearted look at the news where we talk about what's going on in the world, and Joshua, who is a real life 20-year veteran, professional psychic and astrologer, and freakishly accurate with his predictions. He will psychic what's really going to happen. So if you want to know if Trump's going to go to jail, come ask Joshua. If you want to know who's going to win the Republican primary, come ask Joshua. If you want to know what aliens are doing and if they really exist, come ask Joshua. He'll pull out his tarot cards. He'll tell you what's what. We do these on Tuesday nights at 9:30, and they're always a great time. Even if you don't believe in psychics, you can still come, or you can pretend not to believe in psychics. You can still come, and everyone has a great time, and everyone loves Joshua way more than they love me. And so we have a good time with it. And that's going to be at 9:30 tonight. But because we're doing this stream, I'm going to skip the 5 p.m. stream because 3 streams in one day, like back to back to back, just too much. Too much. And this is too important of a spy stream to miss, guys. So I hope you guys will be joining us at 9:30 tonight on the channel. Just also a quick programming note because it is a long weekend coming up. And so I want to let you guys know that my streaming schedule is going to be slightly different for the next week or so. I will be taking Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I don't stream on Sundays, and Monday off. Okay. So I am off Thursday through Monday. There is a chance that we might do a stream in there, but my regular streaming schedule is going to be officially off. We might do a stream just because there might be something going on and I do have some time available, but I have stuff I need to do to include family stuff and like whatever things that people do on long weekends. And so I'm taking a little bit of time off. I hope you guys are okay with that. I mean, you're going to have to be okay with it because my channel will do what I want. But just to let you guys know, Thursday, Friday, happy hour, Sunday, socialism, or Saturday, socialism Saturday, and then Monday stream are going to be canceled. But keep an eye out because there might be some other stuff going on. And I thank you guys for allowing me a little bit of flexibility to, have a real live life and things like that. Yes, I know you're going to be going through withdrawals. I know. But guys, do please make sure to mount that like button for me. We're again waiting for the webinar to get started. I know I do indeed, on occasion, Stephen. On occasion, I do have a life. On occasion, not a lot, but on occasion, I do actually have a life. Guys, do please make sure to mount that like button for me. If you don't feel like mounting the like button, you can shake hands with the like button. Maybe you can read a book with the like button to celebrate the fact that we're talking about libraries today. Maybe you can, caress the like button, gently kiss the like button. You can do whatever you want to the like button, but just don't smash the like button. We're not hooligans on this channel. Where we try to keep it a little upscale. So please mount that like button for me. Mounting the like button lets YouTube know that they should recommend this stream to other people so they come and join us. So it is actually important. And do just double check to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. If you are not already, YouTube likes to unsubscribe people from my channel every single night. And so even if you think you're subscribed, you might not be. Who knows? Let's see. We got Murphy's Pool licking the like button. BDL wants to know, can we be the like button? I mean, I suppose if you can visualize yourself being the like button, you can be the like button. Vince, always the gentleman, showed his appreciation for me taking some time off by simply liking the like button. You can just like the like button. How about that? How about that? Steven is riding the like button. Barefoot in Alaska is going to smoke the like button and get it high as a kite. Anne, who is Murphy's Pool in secret, tongued the like button. All right. Fender Ben tapped it gently. Another Sam was liberating the like button. And Ryan says, you don't want to know what I did to that like button. Ryan, what can you do? What can you do? Vin identified with the like button. George, TMI, George, TMI. Myriad liked button mounted and ridden into the sunset. You guys are so creative. I love it. How's everyone feeling about Spy Stream today? Are you excited to see what's going on and what the Marxist president of the American Library Association has to say? It's going to be a good stream. It is going to be a good stream indeed. We're just still waiting for the meeting to get started, guys. Thank you for sticking with me. Trendolin. Always the hooligan Trendolin. My God. See, people accuse me of having a dirty mind because I make jokes about sex all the time, but I never sodomized the like button is all I'm going to say. Steven says, off topic, Carlin, did you see that video of the elementary kid in Colorado Springs who was kicked out of class for wearing a Doe Tread on Me patch on his backpack? Yes, I did, Steven. I will be covering that on the Substack later today. If you guys didn't see this, it's crazy. They legitimately, they told this kid that the Gadsden flag was racist. And apparently it's the school. Colorado, by the way, Colorado is shaping up to be like uber woke. There's been so much woke stuff going on in Colorado. Usually I pay attention to Portland, Oregon. I pay attention to Burlington, Vermont. But Colorado is shaping up to be like the mecca of woke education. There's just so much stuff going on. I was looking into it earlier today, but I will be covering it on the Substack a little bit later. If you haven't heard about it, or just go on Twitter, something like that. Let's see. Let me see if Emily's tweeting. Sometimes when they find out that I'm streaming their presentations, they just cancel them. And to be honest with you, if a woke organization cancels their private presentation because they found out that I'm streaming it on the internet, I consider that to be a win. I do. It's like, why are you afraid of us seeing what you're talking about? Especially, this is the University of Maryland. This is a taxpayer-funded public university. They shouldn't be hiding stuff. We believe in transparency. Libraries want to talk about how they believe in transparency and no censorship. Well, they should be willing to have their words streamed on the internet then. I just don't see what the problem is. I really don't. You're a taxpayer-funded institution. It's the way it goes. Safe guys, please make sure you're keeping an eye on Safe Libraries in the chat. I'm sure he's going to provide us with some interesting commentary because he is a librarian. He is in the thick of it. He has started a new competing library association to compete with the American Library Association. Says, yes, excited. The American Library Association leader Emily has warned libraries if they defund the ALA, there's more of us than there are of them. Well, we'll see about that, Emily. We will see. So we're still waiting for things to get started, guys. Cheers with my coffee. We can never try. Well, I guess they still have 2 more minutes to get things started, but you know. Is there any other news going on today that you guys have seen that you think I should cover? Let me know in the chat. It's always like the waiting game. I always get nervous right before Spy Stream. I'm like, are they going to cancel? What's going to happen? Are they going to find out that we're streaming? Like, what's going on? Sometimes in Spy Stream, they've announced, we've done Spy Streams before where they announce that they know I'm streaming and they keep doing the presentation anyway. I actually appreciate that. I do. You know, that's at least intellectually honest. It's not like the people who find out I'm streaming their presentation and they cancel it because they're afraid of us knowing what's going on. Now Murphy's Pool, don't spread rumors. Victor was not naked all day on his birthday. We did go out for like a really nice crab boil dinner as well. He wasn't naked for that. Spreading rumors in my chat, per usual, Murphy's Pool. Yes, Sarah with an H says Florida and New Hampshire are trying to remove Trump off the ballot. That is true. And I just have to say, I told you so, guys. I told you Chris Sununu was trying to work with the Democrats. I've been screaming this for 2.5 years in New Hampshire. And now Chris Sununu and his cronies in New Hampshire, Republicans, are trying to take Trump off the ballot. And everyone's like surprised that Chris Sununu is doing this. And I'm like, I told you so. I've been telling you this for 2.5 years. So we'll see what happens there. Trendlin says Victor is a very handsome man. Yes, he is. I'm very lucky. All right, it's 3 p.m. Come on, University of Maryland. Let's get this party started. Let's get it started. We're waiting on them, guys, per usual. Always waiting on the woke leftists. Always waiting. Always waiting. Yes, I'm glad Chris Sununu is not running again, too, but he really wanted to run for president, and now he's so bitter. He's so bitter. Chris Sununu would have lost his own state if he had run for president. I hope people know that. We're just waiting for them to get started, guys. Hopefully they get started any minute now. Do, 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 do. They're not saying anything yet. Chat disabled.
Welcome to our session today, everyone. We're going
works.
to let attendees flow in. We had a heavy response to this session, upwards of 890 registrants. And so we're going to let people have a few minutes to flow into the session. Thank you for your patience.
Registrants. 890. Well, we've got Adrian here, she, her pronouns. I'm kind of annoyed that they disabled the chat. The chat is usually so enlightening when we do these. But what can you do? We're still in. We're still listening.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion, Safeguarding Intellectual Freedom, How to Counter Censorship and the Criminalization of Librarianship. I'm Adrian Lim, Dean of the Libraries at the University of Maryland, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to attend what I know will be a timely and worthwhile panel discussion today. Today's session is the first of several convenings that are being offered as part of the UMD Library's new Living Democracy Initiative, made possible by a generous gift from the Alona Modley Hogan Legacy Fund. The UMD Library's Living Democracy Initiative provides programming and resources focused on advancing democratic values and civic engagement and education in our society. In this live, unrecorded session, our moderator and distinguished panelists are here today to discuss the ways in which all of us can be champions of intellectual freedom and inclusion in these turbulent times, in a time in which we see increasing and coordinated attacks on American libraries, librarians, and library workers. These attacks have occurred in some cases when library leaders and workers have expressed their professional views and philosophies. In other cases, when the libraries have provided inclusive content and programming. And in an increasing number of cases, when libraries and library workers have simply resisted intensive book banning drives. Our panelists' insights and expertise are sorely needed at this time, a time in which in 2022 alone, the American Library Association, ALA, reported that it saw the highest number of attempted book bans since ALA began compiling data about censorship in libraries more than 20 years ago. In this troubling context, many of us are asking ourselves, how can we best respond to counter the divisive strategies and rhetoric which portray libraries as spaces of indoctrination and librarians as villains peddling harmful literature? How can we advance our values and ethics related to inclusivity, justice, and intellectual freedom? And how can we best resist attacks against our inclusive library spaces, programs, and collections? Our panelists will explore the complex issues involved in this intersection of values, ethics, and contentious politics. And they will help us explore together the ways in which we can constructively respond to protect intellectual freedom and justice in our society. They will be sharing their individual remarks first, one by one, and then they will spend time reacting as a panel to the issues and ideas raised. We hope to leave approximately 15 minutes at the end of our 90-minute session for audience questions and comments. To that end, we ask all attendees to use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit questions and comments to the panelists. Please note as well that attendees may enable captions by using the show caption function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator, Lael Hughes-Watkins, who is a great colleague at the UMD Libraries and a leader in her own right in this space. Lael Hughes-Watkins is the Associate Director of Engagement, Inclusion, and Reparative Archiving, a newly established position in the UMD Library's Special Collections and Archives unit. She is a founder of Project STAND, a radical grassroots archival consortia composed of colleges and universities around the country dedicated to creating a centralized digital space which highlights collections emphasizing student activism in marginalized communities. Lael also serves as a co-chair for the 1856 Project, which is a chapter of universities studying slavery at the University of Maryland. She is a 2019 LJ Mover and Shaker and is an ARL Leadership and Career Development Fellow. Thank you so much, Lael, for serving as our moderator today, and welcome to the virtual podium.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and welcome to all of our attendees today. I'm just following up with the words that Adrian shared at the beginning. The role of libraries are viewed as safe spaces for exploration, learning, and critical thinking. And that is under threat with far-reaching implications for the health of our democracy and the advancement of a just and inclusive society. Criminalizing librarianship is particularly insidious a tactic, as it not only hampers the ability of librarians to fulfill their professional and ethical obligations, but also sends a chilling message to other educators and institutions that might dare to challenge the prevailing narrative. And so, as Adrian mentioned earlier, that is part of the crux of what we'll be discussing and hoping to find solutions to today with our esteemed panel. So I would like to begin the introductions of the speakers that we have with us today. First, we have Dr. Paul T. Yeager, who is a professor and distinguished scholar teacher in the College of Information Studies, director of the Museum Scholarship and Material Culture Graduate Program, and associate director of the Maryland Initiative for Digital Accessibility at the University of Maryland. He is the author of 20 books and more than 200 journal articles and book chapters, and is the co-editor of the journals Library Quarterly and Including Disability, as well as the co-chair of the Including Disability Global Summit. We also have with us Emily Drabisky, who is an associate professor of the Queens College School of Library and Information Studies. She edits Gender and Sexuality in Information Studies, a book series from Library Juice Press and Litwin Books, and is contributing writer to The Truth Out. And Drabisky also serves as the president of the American Library Association. We also have Felton Thomas Jr., who is executive director of the Cleveland Public Library. During his tenure at CPL, Mr. Thomas has launched initiatives aimed at addressing community needs in the areas of access to technology, education, economic development. Some of Mr. Thomas's awards and accomplishments include being named a mover and shaker by the Library Journal and being named a White House champion of change for making in 2016. Nationally, Mr. Thomas was elected to serve as the president of the Public Library Association in 2016. He is currently the chair of the Digital Public Library of America and also serves as a trustee on the boards of Front International University Circle Incorporated, Cleveland Museum of Art, and the United Way of Greater Cleveland. And finally, last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Emily Knox, who is an associate professor in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Knox is the author of Book Banning in 21st Century America, published by Rowman and Littlefield. And Dr. Knox is also the co-editor of Foundations of Information Ethics. She serves on the board of National Coalition Against Censorship, and is the editor of the Journal of Intellectual Freedom and Privacy. And at this time, I would like to kick off the panel remarks with the wonderful Dr. Emily Knox.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. So my remarks are going to be fairly brief. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my research and what's going on now. I get asked a lot about what is different in this time of basically book banning crisis. And I said, we see, a huge increase in book challenges across the country. But in fact, the reasons that people give for challenging these books is not much different. It's the same reasons that people have given for engaging in censorship practices since books were invented, which is that reading is a powerful practice. So a couple things I just want to discuss is, why does intellectual freedom matter? Intellectual freedom is the idea that you can read or be exposed to or listen to ideas without fear of retribution and without restriction. Why does it matter? Because it leads to human autonomy, human dignity, and flourishing. So it gives you an idea of how you personally would like to live your life. It gives you options and also makes it so you can make choices in your own life. Another thing I talk about a lot is what I call censorship practices. This is something that we all engage in. So censorship practices might be that you decide that you do not want to read something because you are afraid of having bad dreams or something like that. For example, I don't read horror because I do not want to not be able to sleep at night. That is essentially a censorship practice for me. I use what I call the 4 R's for censorship. These are redaction, restriction, relocation, and removal. So very, very quickly, redaction is what we see, say, in classified documents where you can't see part of it. Also, when I do my Freedom of Information Act requests, often personal information will be redacted, but people sometimes ask for, say, bad words or certain images to be redacted in books. Restricted is when something is put behind the desk or you have to get a permission slip. There's some impediment to immediate access to it. Relocation is usually when a book is moved from its intended audience to another audience. So in a public library, for example, you'd say that's not a juvenile book or a YA book, it's actually an adult book, and it gets moved to the adult section. Finally, removal is what most of us think of as censorship. This is when something is moved from a collection of some sort. But also we have to look at the level of analysis on this. So it could be removed, for example, from a public library collection or from a school collection, library collection, or from a curriculum or from a classroom library. These all have different nuances with regard to the request. So once again, that's censorship practices, the 4 R's: redacted, restricted, relocated, and removal. The other thing I look at in my work is, how do we understand the practice of reading? Reading has outside influence in our world, in thinking about especially the society of the global north. I'm constantly asking my students to read things. Often when I want someone to know about something, I ask them to read it. We actually think about reading as changing what we call knowledge structures, right? It's not simply that there's text on the page, it's that the text on the page, you interact with it in different ways. And what we see with books is that because books contain these texts, they actually are much more powerful. And I look at this in my research. I trace our understanding of recent reading practices from the medieval age, when we started silently reading, through the Reformation, when we really thought about things like sola scriptura, the idea that you could save your soul because of a book. Also ideas about things like critical distance from a text, who has that, who does not. What we see now is that people are targeting not only the books themselves, but also the institutions and people who work in those institutions. And I would like us to think about this historically. This is not something new in the United States. We have never been comfortable with public institutions. When we had the public school movement and the public library movement, people were very suspicious about these things in the late 19th century. There is an idea that hearth and home, that this is where people should learn to read, learn to be citizens. This continues, of course, and into the 20th century, where we see that there is segregation in public institutions, the idea that they need to reflect certain values, including values of segregation. I commend to everybody Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, on the public sphere and how a lot of it is inflected with other isms within the United States, especially racism. But we really see that these issues keep coming around in our history, that in fact, there's always suspicion of public institutions. And it's not surprising that, especially in this time of social upheaval that we live in now, people are really taking a closer look at their local public institutions, where because of our deeply segmented democracy, you can have a lot of say over your public libraries and public schools. Finally, I just want to end by saying all of this is because reading is powerful. A lot of people try to say, well, is this because people don't believe in books? They don't read books. They may or may not read the books that they are challenging, but it's never because they don't think that the books can change people's lives. That is the entire point of censoring. It's the idea that you will be introduced to something that somebody else disagrees with. And of course, this is against freedom of expression and intellectual freedom. The idea that you get to make those decisions for yourself, or if you're a parent or guardian, you can make those decisions for your own child, but not someone else's child. So I just hope everybody can remember that we live in a democracy, and as the Freedom to Read Foundation says, free people read freely. Thank you.
Next, we will have remarks by Paul Yeager.
Hi, welcome. Thank you all for attending this really important discussion today. I'm actually going to be picking up on a lot of threads that Dr. Knox just introduced. So when you signed up for this webinar, you may have noticed that a paper that some collaborators and I wrote was mentioned in the description of the webinar. And so I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the big ideas from that. It was published in the journal Political Librarian just a few months ago, and the idea of the paper is exploring the lessons from previous major censorship movements in the US that might help us now. Specifically looking at what turns calls for book bans into actual laws and policies enshrining censorship. And so this first slide here has 8 really big points that are sort of like the most important themes we could find historically from periods of previous periods of enthusiastic censorship. So it's really important to start by acknowledging that censorship has a very, very long history in law and policy. It's quite probably the original information policy. Major empires in BCE years had censorship offices as part of the administration of empire, but as printed materials became more widely available due to mechanized printing, literacy rates increased, all governments found more and more reasons to think about banning and censoring things. In the US, censorship starts when the colonies start. And it's also worth keeping in mind when we talk about the current censorship movement that until surprisingly recently, censorship was a commonplace thing. And censorship movements in the past have enjoyed pretty widespread public support. Some locations in the country used to be renowned just for how censorship happy they were. If you've ever heard someone jokingly throw around the phrase banned in Boston, there's a history there that is the city had a tendency to censor anything that might upset their view of the proper social order. The zeal of that, I think, is best captured at one point, they banned performance of any work written by classical composer Anton Dvorak because, as an educator, he was mentoring African American and Native American composers. Significant censorship movements are inspired by a desire to thwart social change, even down to whose works are performed and thereby whose perspectives are heard in the concert hall. So not much more than 100 years ago, the most coordinated censorship effort in US history was at its peak. And it was so official that it was being conducted by the federal government's official censor, Anthony Comstock. That was his real job. He was assigned to the Postal Service to censor things in the nation. And his efforts were focused on countering the growing social autonomy for women. That was his role. He was primarily censoring materials related to women's health, women's rights, the suffrage movement, even greater expressions by women. He prosecuted many prominent activists and doctors, bragged about the number of people he drove to suicide, most prominently Ida Craddock and Anne Lohman. Now, this censorship campaign was occurring in parallel to many state and local laws that were also trying to thwart women's rights. But the censorship really defined the age. And it's telling that at the time, when he was alive, his efforts were overwhelmingly lauded by the press and by public officials as an instrument of preserving the status quo. And there are some really hilariously glowingly titled biographies of the man written during his lifetime. But the flip side is now the authoritative biography of the man is entitled The Man Who Hated Women. So censorship is a power exercised by hegemonic forces, hence preserving the status quo. These goals don't have to be held by a majority or even plurality of the population. But if these censorship aficionados have political power, financial wealth, large amounts of other forms of social capital, then their efforts will be far more likely to succeed. They have better chances to know how to shape political processes, to get their voices heard, to drown out the voices of opponents. The hegemon is also better positioned to exploit disinformation, conspiracy theories, and other means to support their desired outcomes. Comstock's efforts, for example, were heavily supported by a national disinformation campaign by religious organizations opposed to women's rights. And one of the public people fronting that was the improbably named Reverend Washington Gladden. So these censorship laws target materials that censors believe will be impactful. And this is exactly what Dr. Knox was talking about. Targeted materials are things that promote rights of previously marginalized groups, elevate perspectives that have not been previously heard, or challenge what's accepted. And the rhetoric to limit these perceived impacts is often extreme, even in the legislative process. When Ronald Reagan was governor of California, he was working to prevent schools from teaching about the civil rights movement up to and including at the university level. And one of his quotes as to the reasons for this is the absolutely delightful quote, "If Eldridge Cleaver is allowed to teach our children, they may come home one night and slit our throats," unquote. So you can see the power, the trying to preserve current power, the fear based in that. And fear is really one of the big things that creates big censorship movements. To stop materials that have a chance of changing how readers think about the world and thereby changing the world that the status quo wishes to preserve. Censorship movements, censorship laws are far more likely to proliferate in times when people are experiencing mass fear for other reasons. A period of time like ours, defined by pandemic, global boiling, rising authoritarianism, mass migration, immigration, hyperinflation, has given everyone plenty to be afraid of beyond their control. So something like censorship becomes a space where people can feel in control of at least one fear. And so if you look at historically authors who have been banned, who have been the center of laws related to censorship, are ones tied to things that are provoking fear in some part of society. And it's also important to keep in mind the society part, because humans are social animals, and we frame our interactions in terms of social groups. And censorship is a means to assert control in a social group. So it becomes an almost unavoidable part of social interactions. So those are the first, most of the points on that slide, but the last couple are also important in the sense of, despite all the negatives, the anti-censorship roles of libraries have played an enormous importance in defining libraries to much of the public. The cumulative impact in the late 1930s and into the 1940s of the field finally starting to stand up to book bans based on intellectual content, crafting the Library Bill of Rights, focusing on intellectual freedom as part of the education campaign during World War II, and then getting directly involved in voter turnout drives after the war, in a 10-year period, fairly heavily shifted how libraries were perceived, and for the positive. Opposing censorship has also not been an easy choice for the field in terms of the many librarians who lost their jobs to stand up against censorship during the Red Scare, or in the 1960s and 70s when there was a previous movement of conservative takeovers of school boards around the country. There were a lot of people whose jobs were lost for supporting all kinds of different ideas. So this new threat, though, of many states starting to talk of protection of intellectual freedom as a potential felony certainly ups the peril, or the seeming peril. But these issues that we are facing now really are continuities. And so the second slide just offers three wonderful quotes from a period of almost 100 years. And if you're not familiar with Leon Karnofsky or Everett Timor, they're worth taking a few minutes to look up sometime, because their battles then are our battles now. And I think the Moore quote is maybe the best articulation of this issue ever. The last one is from just a couple years ago, Shannon Altman's very necessary book, Practicing Intellectual Freedom in Libraries, which, just shows the continuity of then to now. And on this last slide I have, this is just a couple of places to learn more about these ideas. The first is the article I've been discussing. And if you decide to read that paper, please also take a look in the same issue at the paper about the rhetoric of the current censorship movement by Alison Jennings Roche of Towson University. I admit bias because she's a collaborator, but it is a really valuable paper in helping understand how to respond to the rhetoric of this new censorship movement. The second link is to what I hope will be a very valuable resource. I know a lot of people have watched these videos already. There's a dozen plus webinars from a series that every library launched over this summer that provides trainings on all kinds of issues related to responding to book bans and censorship. And both Dr. Knox and the aforementioned Dr. Altman are among the contributors to it. And finally, this isn't on the slide, but I just feel like this is worth mentioning as well, as long as I'm giving recommendations. If you are looking to learn more about the broader legal context that is so currently weighing on libraries, including how these censorship laws fit in, within the next couple weeks, ALA Editions is publishing a new book, Foundations of Information Law. Here I'm really biased because I co-wrote it with Jonathan Lazar, or Ursula Gorham, and Natalie Taylor. But we were thinking that now seems like a really good time for a new book explaining how law works for librarians. I hope you forgive the plugging one of my own things here, but it was meant to be timely. So thank you all for listening.
I think I'm next, and thank you, Paul, for that. Like, my head is sort of exploding. Every time I learn a little bit about history, it makes the present feel a little more tolerable, and I hope some of you are feeling that today as well. I'll have about 10 minutes of remarks on that I'd like to share, and I want to start by thanking the folks at UMD for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's an honor to be here today, and it gives me hope to see more than 500 of you in this room as well. These can be lonely times for people who are in the fight, and so I really appreciate everyone joining today. I've been asked to speak today to the role of professional associations in the struggle to secure not just the right to read, but the right to public institutions and to the public good. Libraries are one of those institutions, among our most used, most trusted, and best loved public institutions. I've spent the last 20 years working in them. I care about them a lot. They're all I think about, and certainly all I think about these days, 2 months into my term as president of the ALA. We all know that a majority of parents and voters across party lines share this belief in libraries. The vast majority of us oppose efforts to remove books from public libraries and from school libraries. We know that organized censorship attempts like what we're facing now are not simply about restricting reading materials. Groups who want to take away funding for libraries are threatening all of those community services simply because they don't approve of certain books that they don't even have to read. We've heard from both Paul and Emily about the social, political, and cultural context of the current spate of challenges to intellectual freedom and the right to read. Libraries are targets alongside public education, both K-12 and higher ed, and all of us, academic, public, special, and school library workers and patrons, have a stake in this issue. Connecting to and with each other and our shared commitments on behalf of the public is crucial. It's clear that censorship efforts like the ones we see today have emerged throughout history in response to conditions that may be distinct but are not unique. My partner, whose birthday is today, happy birthday, Karen. I got her a shirt that says, I love pears, deal with it, because she just loves that fruit. Anyway, she's a historian. She's always telling me that history is about things that are distinct but not unique from one another. And I think I'm grateful to Paul for what he has just shared. It's important to think about the distinction of this moment, but the fact that it is part of our history, I think, is crucial as well. As Dr. Yeager and his co-authors in the piece that inspired this panel make clear, and I'm quoting here, pro-censorship movements historically occur in response to social changes that alarm a privileged population with the goal of dictating access to information for the entire community that is in accord with the personal beliefs of the privileged group. This analysis for me helps explain why LGBTQIA+ books are targeted in a moment when there are more ways to be openly queer, trans, and gender variant than I ever could have imagined growing up as a lesbian in the 1980s in Boise, Idaho. Why books about Black life are under fire following the powerful uprisings of summer 2020. In 2022, the American Library Association saw the highest number of attempted book bans since the organization began compiling data about censorship more than 20 years ago. The 1,269 reported challenges in 2022 nearly doubles the 729 challenges reported in 2021. 2,571 unique titles were targeted for censorship, a 38% increase from the 1,858 unique titles targeted in 2021. Of those titles, the vast majority were written by or about members of the LGBTQIA+ community, as well as people of color. And each of these challenges represents an impact on a real person, multiple real people, the people who wrote the books, that published the books, that had a hand in bringing new work into the public, as well as the person who works in the library. And as book banning gains momentum, it takes an increasing toll on library staff. A few facts that help put that in perspective. More than half of US states are currently facing legislation that would restrict books on library shelves and make it almost impossible to put them back. Some of these state bills would withhold funding for libraries or even put librarians in jail if they don't comply. And these book bans distract from the core mission of libraries to provide access to information. I was reading about what's happening in Louisiana just today, and it was reported that nearly $72,000 of library time and effort and energy went into combating book bans, and that's money that could have been spent on virtually anything else. We know, if you know anything about me, you know that I care deeply about rank and file library workers on the ground, and ALA knows this too. We know that our library staff are the engine that drives library impacts in our communities. Library workers develop and deliver high quality programs, services, and resources. And as we say on National Library Workers Day each April, libraries work because we do. Unfortunately, we also know that library staff are facing several challenges in our work that include these censorship attempts that take time and attention away and target individual library workers. I've been subject myself to some of that targeting in the recent weeks, and I can tell you that the emotional and mental toll it takes on a person is complex and vast and isolating and lonely. And I think every day about the library workers who are facing this on the ground, and it's a lot. This is combined with often flat salaries and increased demands on our library staff with the same or reduced funding, and it takes a toll on our workforce. Our country can't afford to lose the library workers who develop and deliver equitable access to programs, services, collections, and facilities for all our communities. And when we lose libraries, we lose more than access to reading materials, although that would be enough. It means the loss of people who can show you how to make a photocopy, help somebody find a job, can help fill out an online form. I was at a library conference in South Carolina last spring and learned about a program in Charleston where library workers worked hand in hand with people in order to help them get access to rental protection assistance and the eviction assistance program in the wake of the pandemic. People who needed an email address and access to broadband internet and an ability to fill out a form that should be simple. And anybody who works in a library knows that a big part of our work is filling out online forms, and the consequences of not being able to fill those out on individuals is vast and immense. And the library there kept people in their homes. It's consequential material work. It means the loss of literacy programming, broadband wireless internet that powered public education throughout the pandemic. Thinking of Columbia, South Carolina, and the images of students leaning up against the wall with their laptops, gaining access to the internet so they could take their online courses. It means the loss of Library of Things in Des Moines, Iowa, that circulates carpet cleaning machines and book club kits. I grew up watching my mother save for months to get enough money to rent that carpet cleaning machine from the local grocery store to think about a world that we inhabit now in Des Moines, Iowa, where you can get that without paying money. It's a miracle, and we want more of it, not less. The community partnerships in places like Argyle, New York, that distribute fresh produce to residents who need it. All of these things and so many more, and I've been lucky to travel and see lots and lots of libraries over the last year, just to see the immense impact that we make on our communities. We need libraries as much now as we ever have. So what is to be done? I wake up every morning asking myself this question, and maybe you do too. And from the perspective of the oldest and largest library association in the world, I would suggest that we draw on the strengths of this organization as we move forward. The American Library Association, among other things, is a body that convenes library workers in order to solve the knotty problems of our field. Earlier this month, and you may have missed it, but it was very exciting to me, the ALA division, the Reference and User Services Association, approved a revised interlibrary loan code. This work sets the standards for resource sharing, enabling libraries to loan materials between each other on behalf of patrons across the country and throughout the world. It's an example of the best work that associations do, bringing people together to solve problems. And there are literally hundreds of examples of this work, and I learn about more each day. Cataloging standards that emerge from our core division, principles for open access and library publishing coming out of ACRL, solutions for student engagement in the American Association of School Librarians Knowledge Quest publication, which is required reading for school librarians and those who care about them. In the arena of intellectual freedom, ALA convenes an Intellectual Freedom Committee of Council, an Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, committees on legislation and advocacy that take up policy implications. We have an ALA Policy Core cadre for proactive advocacy on book banning that launched last spring. ALA provides infrastructure for these groups to meet, discuss, plan, and act. So if you want to support libraries and library workers, the first thing I think you need to do is go to the library, right? And take a friend, get a library card, use the library. We have to use our public institutions if we don't want to lose them. But another way is to join ALA and get involved in that organization. It's a powerful way to make a difference. The size of our association directly reflects our power. And in some ways, I think it's really that simple. Join ALA, get involved. There's plenty of hard work to do, hand in hand with hundreds of member leaders like me who see that our collective future requires strong libraries. At our annual conference this June, ALA announced an additional $1 million in investments to expand this work, including doubling the staff in our Office of Intellectual Freedom, expanding access to legal support on the ground for library workers, supporting intellectual freedom hotlines and ALA state chapters, a library board campaign school through our United for Libraries division, advocacy training through our chapter relations office, and a national summit for intellectual freedom to be held this January at the Library of Congress. ALA is an association that helps us to organize this work. It's a tool for bringing all hands on deck to address this crisis, a fight for access to information, and also a fight for the right to a public life that includes everyone. These investments supplement ALA's Unite Against Book Bans campaign, which is now in its second year. This public-facing campaign invites everyone to stand up together against censorship, with dozens of national partners, from authors to publishers to the ACLU, people who trust individuals, and I think that includes children, to make their own decisions about what they read. And so I hope all of you will join that campaign and encourage people in your networks to join. We are able to quickly mobilize advocates to support libraries and the freedom to read through that platform. And we continue to add resources and support through the website, so please check it out at uniteagainstbookbans.org. But the truth is, none of us knows how the next few months will unfold. I wake up every morning hoping that maybe it'll be over, that the tide will have turned, that the people will no longer be able to win on this issue. But we don't know. We don't know what's going to get us the win. We don't know what will turn the tide so that libraries can focus less on organized censorship and more on the everyday work we do to strengthen our communities and our institutions. What we do know is that our best chance at a future that includes more libraries, that are bigger and stronger than ever, is if all of us work and stand together towards the world we want. So thank you for the opportunity to share today, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Adrienne, and all the staff at University of Maryland for this opportunity to come before you. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the solutions that are being made, that are in place, and they kind of fall into 5 buckets, right? The first is leadership, and ALA is at the forefront of this, and I want to commend Emily for her work. I saw her in Ohio a couple of weeks back, where she was speaking to 500 folks, getting everybody riled up. It's that type of leadership that we need, not only through our American Library Association, but our state libraries, public libraries, our school libraries, our academic spaces, and our state associations, to get everyone to really understand the issues that we're facing, but to get people inspired to move on this. And as Emily says, this can be as simple as everyone joining ALA and getting involved, or joining their state associations and getting involved and say, I want to be a part of a solution for moving this forward. So number 1 is leadership. We have to be much more forward in our leadership, and our leaders have to be thoughtful about how we move forward with this. Number 2, there's this bucket of solutions that are built around celebrity, right? You see President Obama and Michelle Obama have joined the fight on this, but folks like Jay-Z and Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, are out there with their anti-book ban initiative in New York. They both have pledged over $1 million to provide pro bono legal representation to teachers, librarians, or academics who are caught up in this censorship issue. So you started to see that the issue is starting to reach our celebrity class, and those folks are getting it out there, and it's allowing our community members to know more about it. And I know I have started to hear a lot more from our community members coming up to me, just asking, is everything okay in Cleveland? How are things going? What's happening? Are you finding censorship issues? Are you facing it? And so that means that the word is getting out to the everyday community member. The third kind of bucket of space where folks are fighting this is in our technology space. So Digital Public Library of America has created the Book Banned Club, which uses an app so that if anyone is in a community and they don't have access to a book because it is banned in their community, they can go online and be able to get access to it. There are a number of other kind of technologies through Brooklyn Public Library and other library systems across the country that are making themselves available to everyone so that folks who want one of the titles that might be banned in their community to be able to have access to it wherever they are. So that's third. Fourth is the individual effort of folks. And this is something that I just find really quite amazing. Here in Cleveland, there's a group called Red, Wine, and Blue. They're suburban women who are taking their own cars and turning them into bookmobiles. And the idea is that they will drive anywhere that anyone would want to be able to drop off books that might be banned in these communities. So it's a kind of a individual effort on how they see that everyone can be a part of making a difference. So love what they're doing there. Fourth is legislation. And so communities across the country are starting to write legislation to make sure that their communities aren't banning books. The biggest and largest would be in Illinois, where Governor Pritzker signed in legislation this June that would basically stop and withhold funding from libraries that removed books or any kind of materials from their libraries. So that has started to find some footing across the country, and we started to see that those things are happening. And the last last kind of area or bucket that you see folks really that I see as an area where people are really working hard at, and it simply is changing hearts. All right, I was with one of the most banned authors of 2022. His name is George M. Johnson, and George was talking about his book, All Boys Aren't Blue, and the fact that he gets attacked in communities all across the country, even to a point that he was going on an author visit and someone figured out he was in an airport and started chasing him, right? That's the type of thing that some of our folks are dealing with. And he was saying that what he felt was so interesting, though, is he went to a community where they were getting ready to ban his book in the school system. And he's getting out in front and getting ready to say something. And a woman breaks it, kind of comes up in front, moves him to the side. And she just started screaming, "Shame on you." And he thinks she's talking about him. But ultimately, she turns to the school board and said, "Shame on you for trying to outlie this book." I hear everybody said that what he was writing was evil and bad and whatever. And he goes, "Finally, I read the book and I realized that this is a book about this man's life and it's about his family. And after reading this, I love his family. I love his grandma. I love the people who raised him. And I think the parts that you talked about were in this book that made me hate him were not true." And if we are able to in any way try to position and let folks understand that many of these books that are being banned by misinformation, we can change hearts. So those are the areas that I think that we see as kind of we need to kind of put into an ecosystem, those 5 areas for a real kind of true effort to counter this banned book coalition that we have. They are, the folks, the Moms for Liberty and all of those folks on that side They have been working for many, many years at this. They have a plan in place and they have an extensive amount of funding. We're playing catch up and we have to kind of do a lot of work to get there. But as I said, there are a lot of different areas that we are working on and are working to kind of counter it. And I think hopefully this is the start of today and a discussion around how we can all come together and do our part in kind of combating this censorship that is out there and that we're facing. So I'm going to now stop and then I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for all these amazing introductions from the panelists. We are getting rapid fire questions from the audience. So just trying to make sure I integrate all of these well. So one of the comments has come from an attendee is specifically making a distinction between red and blue states. And so want to put to the panel, how should libraries navigate issues of, some of you have already provided very specific examples, but how should libraries navigate issues of censorship, especially when community or governmental pressures challenge the principles of intellectual freedom? And that definitely can look different depending on what state you are in. So if you could give some insights there. Emily Kay.
Yeah, I'll go first. I would not rely on that in any way, shape, or form. All libraries and people who care about libraries need to be prepared. That's not really, the state doesn't matter nearly as much as the district, jurisdiction. I would not think about it in any way. We see censorship attempts all over the country, and trying to think of like, well, I live in a blue state, that's not going to make a difference if they are challenging your local public library that is in, say, rural Southern Illinois. It does not, I would not rely on that in any way.
Thank you, Emily Kay. Does anyone else from the panel want to address that question?
I guess I'll just say from the perspective of ALA, these struggles are always local, right? Like what the struggle looks like in a New York City public school library, which, you know, they are facing these kinds of challenges too, looks different, and the stakes are different, and the players are different, and the pushback is different than in my home state of Idaho, for example. But I do think it's important. That's why one of the reasons I think it's really important, in addition to joining whatever organization you can, think about joining your state chapter of ALA where work is happening, you know, that's a lot more targeted to what is happening in the state. I also think, you know, the question of how to navigate this, it just reminds us how important it is to have policies for the use of the library that are fairly applied equally to all people, and making sure that access to meeting rooms, programs, display cases, the privacy of patron records, purchasing, reconsideration policies, that all of these kinds of policies are written out, that they're publicly available, and that they can be followed equally for everyone. I think that's even more important now. I heard a great story out of New Jersey where the solution to the book ban challenge was to follow the policy, right? And we just saw news today out of Mobile, Alabama, a place where I think those of us who maybe aren't from there would be like, oh, Alabama, but like Alabama is a place full of people that want their children to read also. And it was great to see a win coming out of that state today. So those would be my thoughts also.
Yeah. If I could just add to Emily's answer, is what we found here in Ohio has been a big issue for many of our smaller libraries. They didn't have a censorship policy or information freedom policy in place. And so they were being attacked without having anything to base what they would do with it from, you know, how they would counter it. So, you know, libraries, larger libraries have worked with them to kind of have a standard from which to start with.
Yeah, I just got to follow it up and say, like, people will say, well, they don't follow the policy. But if you don't have a policy, you can't say they didn't follow the policy. So you should have a policy anyway. Don't use that as a way of not developing. You have to be able to say that your legal representation will ask you about the policy. Have the policy. Some people will not follow it, but you can say, I have a policy.
Thank you for that. Another question, how do we explain our problems? Again, this is one from the audience. How do we explain our problems with censorship to people who are generally well-meaning, but are playing into the hands of violent censors like Moms for Liberty? Like people who say, well, X book does not belong in the YA section, or X does not belong in the school library. Hate groups like Moms for Liberty need those people to legitimize them.
I mean, this is why I think it's really important to understand that the people sort of responsible for securing the right to read are the people who work at the library, right? And so, you know, we are professionals, we are trained and practiced and skilled in making collection development decisions. We catalog items and shelve them, and it isn't, you know, anybody who works in a library knows it's a lot of work, and it isn't something that just anybody could walk in off the street and know how to do. And just the same way that I wouldn't, you know, I have lots of maybe observations about how dentists should not you know, go at my back teeth in exactly that way and should be nicer to me. Like at the end of the day, I defer to their expertise, and they know how to clean teeth. And even though I might have ideas about how to do it better, I acknowledge that that's their line of work. I don't cut my own hair, even if it looks like it today, right? People have expertise, they have training, they are professionals. And so it's important to acknowledge like the people who do the work, and it is professional librarians who know what they're doing, and making sure that everybody knows that it's the librarians who make these decisions, not people in the community. And, you know, which is not to say that we don't want public input in our collections. Public institutions should be open to public sort of interest in how we function. But at the end of the day, I think making the librarian the person who is responsible for making decisions about the library, just making sure that we you know, acknowledge the professionalism there, I think is a big part of the work.
Yeah, libraries have had reconsideration policies in place, and
Oh, you muted your Felton, you're
okay.
muted.
Yeah. So, and we have standards that we've been using for many years on how we examine the titles and where we put them and things of that nature. So we can have that discussion with anyone as long as they're willing to have a reasonable conversation. I think that's the problem that we've seen just recently with a number of folks who who aren't even reading the books that they're talking about, right? When folks do read the book, as I said in that George M. Johnson, they often feel that they've been, you know, brought in and kind of hoodwinked by these folks who are just trying to make them get them all riled up for nothing.
Does anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to say it's not helpful if you're talking to an individual person to tell them that they are a member of a hate group. You have to be able to do various levels of analysis depending on what you are dealing with at any given time. So, yes, there are issues with Moms for Liberty. People call it AstroTurf, but that does not matter when somebody comes to your library and is talking to you about the book, right? You cannot engage with them that way. So this is why those of us in library schools, those of us who care about libraries, need to be much better about preparing people for engaging in these conversations. Because people will not agree with you. Sometimes even if they read the book, they still will be upset about it, right? You have to think of different strategies that you can use. Now, that's different when you're dealing with a group, and it's different when you're dealing with an organization. Each of those are different. And I just have to mention that a lot of this is because people coming after libraries, I just need to think about it historically. It's because libraries are a historically feminized profession that is not paid very well. The library is a weaker institution. It's easy to target in many ways because it is so local, and people see it every day. It has an embodiment of values that people sometimes agree with, sometimes don't. All of this makes libraries very messy for many people because they are so open and are run by generally people who identify as women. All of these things come together. But when I'm talking to somebody and they're upset about a book, I'm not discussing all that. I'm talking about them, their concern about their children, their concern about other people's children, and the values that they hold and that they're worried that their children will be exposed to through these books.
I was going to say, Dr. Knox, do you think, though, libraries should have seen this coming, right? This has been happening 20 years in teaching, right? Charter schools, religious, taking payment, making from that side, whatever we said, the red side, taking money away from public schools, trying to intentionally cut government workers and things of that nature. We've seen this coming for many years, and libraries kind of just sat there kind of going like, hey, as long as you're not messing with us, we're good, right? Until they start messing with us. So I think we do have to take some blame for many years not recognizing that the slippery slope was eventually going to get to us.
Yeah, this is actually work that Dr. Yeager and also Dr. John Bushman have been doing for a very long time, talking about libraries in the public sphere. Libraries, if you think about like the 1950s, libraries were a target for Red Scare propaganda. We just lost our vigilance, and I think we just need to gain it back and really work on saying why libraries matter. The work that Emily is doing right now is, I'm sure, when you were going to become president, you didn't realize it would be quite like this, but we have to say how wonderful libraries are and all of these services that would be removed if libraries aren't there. And this is for all libraries. I mean, academic libraries, school libraries, people need quiet places to study, right? All these libraries provide so much more to the community than just even media, just like a quiet place to be, which is just impossible to find for free, really, in our country.
Thank you. Language is really I think it's a really important part of this conversation. Oftentimes language gets co-opted from one side or the other. I'm thinking about the terminology woke and how DeSantis has completely flipped it into something else. If you don't know the history of woke, please look it up. It did not start with Ron DeSantis. So one of the questions from the audience is, how does legislation that is attempting to dismantle DEI in K through 12 and higher education have an impact on library collections? For example, in Ohio, there's SB A3 that is aimed at removing DEI initiatives and replacing them with the language such as intellectual freedom.
Well, I could speak to it because I am in Ohio, but I have been talking a lot, so I don't want to take anyone else around that. I do believe, I think just for anyone who knows what's going on with that probably won't go very far, right? We're very fortunate in the fact that they may probably have overstepped in everything that they've tried to do, and Ohio is not there. But that doesn't mean in other states that are closer to that ideology that it won't happen. And so I do believe that we as libraries have to recognize that while we see this happening in the academic world, we should be partnering and creating coalitions with other folks, because we kind of get lost in the think of, well, that's not going to affect the public library, or that's not going to affect the school library, but once those things start happening, it just starts to roll, right? And it just rolls into every other aspect of it. And that's kind of what they on the other side are trying to do. They're trying to start and then see how whatever they put out there can maybe have some, you know, some catchiness to be able to move forward. Fortunately, you know, that's not going to is kind of already been defeated, but you know, those folks they're an interesting lot. They're a little wacky here, but in some places they are very malignant. And so we have to be very careful about where we go.
Thank you, Felton. A lot of the questions that are coming in are about concern with respect to danger, that harassment that's happening to librarians. You know, Emily, you already spoke so eloquently on the challenges that you are facing and that so many others are facing in the field. So someone from Missouri is specifically asking, does ALA have legal help or librarians who are in danger of being jailed for doing their jobs? And on top of that question, I would like to ask if any of you would also be willing to share, if you're comfortable with some of the specific challenges you may be facing with respect to fear for your own bodily safety, mental safety in your positions.
I mean, I guess I'll, you know, oh, Emily, do you want to go first?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think Dr. Yeager had something to say.
Oh, good.
That was actually with the previous question. So
You don't have an answer to this one, Dr. Yeager? I mean, I think like what makes the question so challenging is that there are no easy answers, right? Like if there were easy answers to this, we would be enacting them right now and we would be like sort of stopping the problem. I think the harassment that people are experiencing, and I talk to library workers all over the country every day, right? Like I'm only ALA president for a year. I'm trying to really make sure that I understand the scope of what's happening nationwide so that I can speak about it with some authority. And what I hear are things that I'm experiencing myself, like a deep sense of isolation, a sense of shame, struggling with the sense that that I did something to cause this problem, and you know, all of those kinds of things. What I find most helpful is talking to other people who've been through it. Amanda Jones, who's the librarian a lot of us know about in Louisiana, have her in my phone on speed dial, just talk about like what the feeling is like. And I think that's the sort of idea behind the helplines that ALA is hoping to fund in various chapters in the coming year so that people can connect with one another around these sorts of issues. And I think it's really important to be clear about sort of what is happening, and that attacks on the book are attacks on people who wrote the book, people who want to read the book, and the people who want to ensure that that book gets in the hands of other people. And so organizing a lot of our response around library workers and their need to be supported in their work, I think is super essential and super important. The American Library Association has a merit fund for potentially for workers who are facing discrimination or displacement due to their commitments to intellectual freedom. And so that is a fund that I am directing a lot of my honoraria to this year, and urge everyone to support. It gives, because I think what we also need is material support, direct material support to library workers who are struggling. And that's one of the ways that we get that funding to people. Yeah, in the physical safety thing, it's like we have to think of safety broadly, right? It isn't just like, do I worry that I will be subject to gun violence in this country? I think most of us worry about that in ways that we wish we didn't have to, but making sure that we're taking care of each other is essential. And I welcome any ideas about how to do that more effectively, for sure.
Yeah, this is like really, it's crazy because like today, just before I jumped on, the director of Chicago Public Library sent out to our listserv of directors across the country, has anyone else received bomb threats today? Right? because 10 libraries around Chicago had all received bomb threats from whoever, but they think it was, in response to the governor's, not wanting to have legislation, signing that legislation, because those library systems have decided not to ban books in those communities. So it is, it's very unfair to the libraries that have it happen, but it's also unfair to the larger folks, because when that happens to someone in Chicago, then my staff call me and say, are we getting bomb threats? Are things happening? And there's that concern about, like, throughout the public libraries across the country, is there something that could happen to me?
Yeah, so I want to add just a little bit more on legal representation. So ALA is not able to provide individual legal representation. This has to be done state by state and locally, but I'm actually a trustee for the Merit Fund, so I will talk about why yourself in a particular place, please reach out to the Merit Fund. And also, if you are able to donate to the Merit Fund. My hope is that many of us in the freedom of expression community, that's a whole bunch of different organizations. I'm the board chair for the National Coalition Against Censorship, Freedom to Read Foundation, PEN, ACLU, that we can reinstate lawyers for libraries, which was actually done in like the 1980s and 90s. And I really think we need to do that again. So I'm putting that plug out there if you know someone who might be interested in that. But that's really to train lawyers locally. So if they're a member of the bar in a particular state, and they would get continuing ed credits for supporting libraries and librarians and library workers in this time. So my hope is that we can get that off the ground. But legal representation is very tricky because it really needs to be much more local than people think. So ALA can provide guidance for that, but legal representation needs to be found locally. I just want to say you should know who you would go to for legal representation. I keep telling my students that your library should have a lawyer, right? And sometimes like, where do I find a lawyer? I'm like, that's part of the job of working in a library, is knowing who you can reach out to for that. So being proactive for that, and also being proactive for finding your community before something happens. Who would you reach out to? To me, that's part of the emergency toolkit that we need to develop right now, which is where can I go if something happens? Because more than likely, something will come up that you might be surprised about through a request for reconsideration. Who are the people on your staff? Who are your personal people that you can just talk things through with? Just have that in your mind before something happens.
Thank you again, everyone, for those particular responses. Again, we're getting more questions on fear for folks' lives. And back to what you just said, Emily Kay, is there any more that this particular panel can share about a toolkit or specific resources that people can put into place at their institution where resources can specifically be outlined about what can be immediately implemented at their space?
I'm actually teaching advocacy and preparation in my intellectual freedom and censorship class today in 40 minutes. So I can send all of the tool guides that I have for my students to look through there. If you just Google book banning prep toolkit, you'll see a bunch. PEN America has one. Kelly Jensen has done one for Book Riot. There's the Intellectual Freedom Manual, which I cannot say enough great things about, from the Office for Intellectual Freedom. The National Coalition Against Censorship has lots of tools for especially youth to be involved in this. We have our Youth Advocates for Free Speech group. So there's lots of things out there. The main thing is to use what's best for you. So these are best practices, but your situation is individual. So think about what can you pull from all of these different resources that will work for you and your situation.
I was going to say something, but I changed my mind.
So as more intense pro-censorship forces are encountered by librarians, there's a risk that institutions, right, universities, libraries, and local governing boards might begin to make preliminary moves toward more self-censorship in anticipation of future repression and regulations. In a way, this helps these repressive forces know how far they push people. Or as Timothy Snyder put it in his book on tyranny, it can lead some entities to begin, quote, obeying in advance. How can librarians and libraries advocate against doing this and instead remain brave and resourceful in the midst of pro-censorship attacks?
We got to do it. We just got to be brave. We got to pull up everything that we have in us and say, this is like a moment, right? And it's a moment not just for libraries. It's not just about the book. It's not just, oh, Paul, did you want to speak?
I wasn't trying to interrupt. Just when you're done, I'm sorry, but yeah.
Okay.
When you're done.
Yeah. Okay. So I just like, we need organizations to be braver and people to be braver. And I think about that all the time, right? Like, how can we stand together? I think like when we're out on a limb on our own, that's one thing. And so we need everybody to stand together. And I think a lot about this moment as a moment of history, right? That we're always in history, but now I feel like libraries are really in history. And what are we going to do right now? Right. And it is a fight, not just for libraries, but I think a fight for a future that we can inhabit that will like allow for freedom for all of us, right? Like that's it, right? So what are we going to do? How do we be brave? I think we be brave together. I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. So this is also a space where education. We need so badly more attention to this kind of stuff in education, in library programs for future librarians, in continuing education. If you look across like the curriculums of library schools, a lot of what we're talking about today, people don't have the option in a lot of places to really get prepared for. And so when we talk about like making sure people aren't falling into defensively self-censoring, or institutions aren't creating policies where they're trying not to get in trouble. We as a field on the education side really haven't done a good job of preparing people to think in terms of advocacy and law and policy and responding to, challenges. And the John Bushman was mentioned earlier. This is an issue he's been writing about since probably most people participating in this and listening, before most of us were in the field. He's been trying to make this point. So, I'm forgetting which of his pieces, but say 20 years ago, he wrote that, in this public space, we are trying to bowl with marbles, was the metaphor. And that has always stuck with me after reading it, because if we don't prepare everybody, if we don't keep giving people new resources, new trainings on these things, we can't expect to do well.
Thank you, Paul. I just want to try to squeeze in one or two more questions before closing remarks. This is specifically directed towards you, Emily D. Is there a concern about more state library associations leaving the ALA, and what messages do you have for libraries in the states that have left?
I mean, that's the question, right? Talk about a thing that keeps me up at night. I do want to, we aren't seeing state chapters leave the association. There's a small handful of state libraries that have canceled their memberships. It's, of course, something of deep concern and not something that we've seen in libraries for a very long time. Is it concerning? Absolutely, yes. To libraries that are in states where this is happening, I just want everybody to know that, the ALA supports libraries and library workers regardless of their membership in ALA, that we are connected and working on the ground with people who are facing these kinds of situations. We're concerned for library workers as that's my primary concern. And that doesn't change if the state library cancels its membership inside of ALA. I do think, it's important to note what is happening here as an attack, not only on individual library workers in the individual library, but on institutions, public institutions, and organizations like ALA that support those public institutions. And so as we're facing that, what's the answer? What's the solution? Unprecedented times. I knew that I would be president of the American Library Association, openly gay, in a time of extraordinary violence against LGBTQ plus people, openly committed to the public sector in a time of, unrelenting attacks on that. And, the ALA is an old organization with a long, long history and a whole lot of people that support us. And I know we're going to make it through. But I appreciate the question. And if you have an answer, again, email me, let me know.
Thank you, Emily. And then closing out just the series of questions. I know we kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, a little bit back in our conversation, but just really thinking about how all of this so much really does tie into social justice. So in times like this, our professional ethics, including intellectual freedom, must be protected, right, and defended. But there are some within the library profession itself who question whether the principles of intellectual freedom have been used inequitably to uphold the status quo in service and the dominant powers in society. So what are your thoughts about the tension in the library profession? And are there valid arguments to be made that intellectual freedom and social justice are not mutually exclusive, and that both are necessary for liberation and justice?
I'll take that on first. I have an entire article called "Tensions between these two values." Honestly, you cannot have social justice without intellectual freedom. How can you be introduced to these ideas of what it means to have a just society without intellectual freedom? I think this is a misunderstanding of how it's kind of putting a political idea on top of things that are a little bit more foundational. So yes, intellectual freedom is a classically liberal idea, but it can lead to a just society. I recommended a book, The Sum of Us, for people to read. It's about having a more just society. If someone decides to take that book off your shelf because they don't like it, then how will you know all the wonderful things that Heather McGhee is trying to tell you about our history? What I think gets a little confused is when people say, well, it allows hate groups to meet in libraries and that sort of thing. But this is really based on how do you make sure that everybody's rights are protected within a library? And the truth is that a lot of organizations that work for social justice are labeled as hate groups by various people. And so you have to make sure that your library will not be attacked for having, say, a Black Lives Matter meeting in its open meeting space. Even though there are people who truly believe in their heart that Black Lives Matter is a hate group. This is a way of actually expanding ideas of justice. It's not, I don't know what is just about saying, well, we can't talk about this particular idea. I am going to decide that this is unjust and therefore cannot be part of our discourse. That is moving into using power in ways that often come back to bite us. So I would just be very careful about moving in that direction. Intellectual freedom is a principle that leads to justice. You cannot have human flourishing, autonomy, dignity without allowing people to make choices. You may not agree with all their choices, but they have to be able to see what choices are out there.
I'll just add that what I love about working in a library is everything's material, nothing's theoretical, right? Every day we're making a more just world when we help somebody find the book they need, show them where the bathroom is. You know, I spent 20 years showing people where the bathroom is. All of that is crucial material, on the ground work towards creating the world that we want to live in and inhabit every day. And so the question of the tension between these two things, it's like, it's one thing to think about it theoretically, and then it's another thing to be sort of grappling with the tension on the ground. And so I think what Dr. Knox says is spot on and right on, and I couldn't agree more. I think the only thing that I would add is that even as we promote intellectual freedom, library workers and people who work in libraries deserve to be kept safe. And so when safety and sort of workplace safety has to be a part of the conversation when it's necessary, right? And that's just one other element that I would add to that. And then it takes really strong leadership. It takes leaders who know what we're facing right now and understand the complexity of things, and are committed to keeping the people who work every day in the library safe and whole as they do that work.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think to Emily's point, there's a lot of tension on the ground right now. Like actually in our libraries, we have people being threatened. We have a lot of issues that we're facing. And I think we need to focus all our efforts and all our resources around that work and creating those coalitions. And as Dr. Knox and Dr. Jager said earlier, right, there is a lot of work that has been done on this in the past that we have not been able and have not used, right? We need to get our staff and everybody on board with all of these important resources so that we can go and do this work, right? We need to be doing the work out front.
Thank you. And Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything. My lights keep going off.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in, I have this is something that I think is something we could do more with. We do have ideas that are ways of talking about things that probably don't help convey our messages very well. And if someone, wants to talk about libraries and social justice, there's a very simple thing to explain, which is society hasn't actually created a better mechanism for promoting social justice than the library. When you go through all of the ways that libraries help, and lots of them have been mentioned, but there are so many more, there is no better engine of taking human rights concepts, taking civil rights concepts, and actualizing them into social justice in a community, for community groups, for individuals, for an entire community, than the library. And as we confront these sorts of things, it's certainly learning from what is there as resources, using the supports that exist. Those are obviously essential things, but there's also an opportunity here the studies, like, Pew has done a number of these this millennium, that even among people who love their local public library, most of them don't really know much of what it does. And so as we confront these calls for things to be banned, to censor whole groups of perspectives and voices, we can also confront that by trying to change the narrative in our favor and think about being assertive, not just that intellectual freedom is essential, it's what we do, but it's also part of a bigger package of intellectual freedom, information literacy, all kinds of connections to community support, and on, that our institutions are institutions of justice. And the more we can help people understand that, the more we can feel comfortable claiming that, embracing it, the more we have a chance to change the tide of how all of this is talked about.
Well, that was a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm going to hand over the mic to Adrian. I'm just going to end my part by saying, standing in solidarity with our library freedom fighters.
Wow, that was an amazing panel discussion. I can't imagine that somebody attending this session would leave without having learned something, gained some insights, and gained some strategies for how to counter censorship in their particular contexts. I want to thank the panelists so very much for sharing your insights and your knowledge. Felton, Emily D., Emily K., and Dr. Paul Yeager. And then also Lael for serving as our wonderful moderator. Thank you very much. And then finally to mention Judy Kidd and Kate Maloney, who helped with the logistics and with the promotion of this session. Please do keep track of the UMD libraries and future webinars that we will be offering in our Living Democracy Initiative. And I guess I would just say thank you for the inspiration and for the bravery that you all have had in this work. And you are motivating all of us to do more of the work in our own context. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending too.
All right. Everybody.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Stand by. Oh, we're done. Well, largely uneventful because they kept a very professional posture on, but they did let the mask down a couple times, didn't they? I particularly liked the ending portion where they made it very clear that they see their roles as librarians as being the beacons of social justice, and that libraries are the main drivers of social justice in the communities. And of course, we all know that social justice is code word for Marxism. Yes, Spot, now that the stream is over, please make sure you do send it to Emily. Go ahead and just tag her in the tweet I sent out. We actually streamed the whole thing on Twitter, so if anyone wants to tag Emily in the stream that I just streamed to Twitter with her secret webinar, that would be great. Just because Emily blocked me on Twitter doesn't mean I blocked her, so she should still be able to see it. Speaking of Emily, I did like the point where Emily said that children should be allowed to read whatever books they want because children can decide for themselves what is and is not appropriate for them. I also did appreciate, just on a personal note, when I almost made Emily cry because I was the one who asked the question, Emily, what do you have to say about all these state associations leaving the American Library Association, and what is your message to the remaining librarians in those states whose association has left the ALA? And I have to say, I was very, moved that Emily almost cried on the webinar. You're welcome, Emily. But overall, I thought it was really good for us to get a sneak peek inside. Now, a couple points, because what they just gave us are their talking points, okay? And you need to be aware of this. Number one, I know that people disagree with me on this, but I firmly believe that Moms for Liberty has done irreparable damage to the anti-woke movement with the book banning stuff. I do not agree with the book banning stuff. I know that there are people who disagree with me. That's fine. I personally don't agree with it. I've always thought it was a horrible strategy that would backfire. And we're seeing that because, guys, organizations like the American Library Association are going to raise record amounts of money based on the book banning nonsense. And that's all it does, is it feeds right into what the left wants. It was the reaction that the left wants. And the left will continue to weaponize what Moms for Liberty has done forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And I'm sorry, I told everyone this was going to happen the minute this book banning stuff started with that Moms for Liberty chapter in Tennessee. But it was the only thing that they could use to make them famous. And so here we are. So I don't agree with that. I don't like Moms for Liberty. Like, I do not support that organization at all. Moms for Liberty has blocked half the people in my community, which tells you exactly how much they care about ending wokeness rather than just like, raising money and making themselves famous. But people are welcome to disagree with me on that. The more important point that I do want to make is that the point that they're going to be running with to attack parental rights is that, well, one of the points is that you can decide for your children. You can't decide for other children. And I think everyone should make sure to keep an eye out on that point because, to be quite frank, they're right. They're right. Parental rights mean parental rights for other people too. And I do think that there is something just deeply ineffective about trying to legislate morality through policy. If a parent wants their child to go listen to a story from a drag queen, then that should be their choice. If a parent wants their child to read a book with sex in it, that should be their choice. And you might not personally like it, but if you want parental rights for you, then you need to stand up for parental rights for other people. And people might not, I know people don't like me saying this, but parents screw up their kids all the time. People are allowed to screw up their kids. Pretty much every parent that has ever had a child has screwed up their kids in some way, shape, or form. We're not talking about physical abuse. We're not talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about just like you doing things that screw up your kid psychologically, which pretty much everyone that's ever had a kid has done. And that's not something that you can legislate your way out of. And so the only path forward, if you really want parental rights for you, is that you have to accept and even advocate for parental rights for everyone else, even the people who disagree with you, because that is the only way that it's ever going to work. And then you have to focus on providing for your kid, raising your kid with your morals, your values, but other people's kids are none of your business, just like your kid is none of their business. So those are kind of my main takeaways. I'm going to have to think about some of this stuff like that we heard today, but just keep in mind we did see a lot of their talking points today, and that will inform, that should inform how you're fighting back against them. And, I think it's one of those things that I would not recommend calling the library angry about books. If you have not read the book that you want banned, read the book. Like, this is another thing that constantly gets the right into trouble, is they want things banned that they don't understand. Read the book before you call the library angry about it, because if you don't, they're going to use that against you. Don't call the library about every single thing. Pick your battles, fight the most important battles, because if you're calling the library every single day complaining about something, they're going to end up starting to ignore you, and they're going to get pissed off at you because you're wasting their time. We have to do our due diligence just as much as the other side is. We have to fight smarter. No shouting, no reeing, no complaining about things that you don't understand. This is what gets us into trouble, and this is what loses us independence in the process. So that's all we have for today, guys. Thank you for joining me for Spy Stream. A special thank you out to Dan. Dan corroborates. He says, read the book. If you don't, eyes roll immediately. That's right. That's why we do deep dives on my channel, guys, because I want to make sure you know what you're talking about so that you're not just spouting the talking points that the conservative influencer du jour has given you to spout. We do our own homework here, and we make sure we watch everything from start to finish, the boring bits, the cringy bits, etc., etc. All right, guys, I'm going to go take a little bit of a break, but And I will not be doing the 5 p.m. stream for people who asked, because we did this one. This was a last minute impromptu thing. I apologize for people who weren't able to watch it when it was live. But I'm going to go take a break, because in about 5 hours, I'm going to be back at 9:30 p.m. tonight. And we're going to do Nothing Remotely Controversial with Joshua. Come back, enjoy Nothing Remotely Controversial with us. But until then, guys, take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.